Hello and welcome to another training video from West Networks. My name is Peter West and today I'm going to be talking about the MBX and all of its glory and some of the things that make this thing so amazing. But mostly what I want to do is show you how to set it up and get going. As you can see, I actually have three MBXs here. I've got an HD4 CAT18, an HD2 CAT18, and then this is an HD2 5G. If you're interested in this setup, I actually have another video about setting up 5G in my car that is using this router. So I'm going to go over the general overview, talk about the modules, the expandability, and then what comes in the boxes, and then how to set them up. This is the MBX. You're going to have 8 PoE LAN ports, a single LAN or WAN port, 2 Ethernet WAN ports, 2 Wi-Fi modules, USB WAN. On the back, you're going to have your antenna connections with your GPS, your SIM card slots. Now these take the 2FF standard SIMs, and so it's important to know what that means. This is the 2FF standard SIM. This is a nano SIM that comes with most hotspots and jetpacks. So if you have this, when you buy from West Networks, you're going to get an adapter. You're just going to plug the adapter into the SIM card, and now you have converted that SIM card into a 2FF. So you can put your SIM cards in. So I'll put my AT&T SIM card there, my T-Mobile SIM card there, and for the purpose of this video, I'm just going to use two SIM cards, but you could add more. Then you have your dual power supply input. This is 56 volt power supply. You get one that comes in the box. You can expand it with another one if you'd like to give yourself a total of 250 watts of power, but also have redundancy for power input. So you have 2 power supply inputs. You have your DC 12 volt input, 12 to 56 volt. So this, if you have 12 volts of input, there's no PoE. 56 volts of input, you get PoE. And then this is your ignition sense capabilities to be able to do ignition sense on your vehicles. And then you have your antennas. So this is the 5G router. We're going to use this router for the remaining of the testing.
Upgrading a module is also very easy. You simply just unscrew the 4 outer screws. You don't need to unscrew these 2 inner screws right there on the back. And then once you've unscrewed those, you can just pop it up. Open your box with the new module in it. It would be going from a CAT18 HD2 MBX to the brand new 5G HD2 MBX. Then just slide it on, and you can see there's a circuit right there, a PCI bus slot. So we just slide it on, take out the screws, put them in, obviously swap out your SIM cards, and tighten it down. You do want to make sure the router is off when you're doing this.
This is a CAT18 HD2. Once again, same front bezels, same connectivity. What's different here is I've got SMA connectors because, and you can see I've got my cellular 1 and my cellular 2 because it's 4x4 MIMO. So these are SMA connectors on the HD2 CAT18. Still 2 power supplies, still DC input, still ignition sense, and still dual Wi-Fi. And then you have your WAN, and then your PoE LAN, and then your USB. This is what I used when I was traveling most recently. This is an HD2 5G. So I've got my Wi-Fi connected, I've got my USB, my 8 gigabit LAN, my LAN/WAN, my 2 WANs. And then on the back, you can see I've got my 12 volt connected, and once again, you can look at my video if you want. I just wired this up to a little car outlet and gave myself power while I was traveling. And here you can see I've got my SIM card slots, my ignition sense, my DC, my dual power. And then here I've got weird cellular 1A/B, cellular 1C, cellular 1D. This is my 5G. Then I've got main 1 and 2. This is my 4G CAT12 that comes with that's my second connection. So this is a 5G, 4G router. In the box, when you open these up in the box, you're going to have your router, your power supply, you're going to have your 4 Wi-Fi antennas, a grounding cable. If you're running a QMA router, so an HD4 CAT18 or an HD4 5G, you're going to have a single QMA to SMA adapter for your GPS. Your mounting ears, your GPS cable, and then if you buy any router that has SMA, so the 5G HD2, the CAT18 HD2, the CAT12 HD4 MBX, those are all going to come with your SMA antennas. So you have your SMA antennas that come with any of the SMA routers, and then you have your QMA to SMA adapter. So if you're buying a QMA router, if you're buying something with either the CAT18 MBX HD4 or the the 5G MBX HD4, you need to make sure you have antennas. And so I've got this extra power brick here just to show you the redundant power. So this is the Puma 401. There's a couple different Peplink antennas. So this is the Puma 401. It has 4 CAT QMA connectors on it. And so you can plug this into the router and have your connectivity. So you need 4 of these if you're running 4 5G modems. Let's get into setting it up. I've already, you watched me earlier, I removed the SIM card covers. I plugged in one AT&T and one T-Mobile. So now I need to hook up my power. So I'm going to grab my power brick here. And I do apologize for my finger. I had a little mishap over the weekend, so you might see that for the next couple videos until that heals. And then hopefully you see a normal looking finger when I'm done, but that might not be the case. So I'm going to plug this into my DC slot here. And then because I only have the 2 cellular, and to keep this clean, I only need to worry about cellular 1 and cellular 2. So I'm going to go ahead and plug these QMAs into cellular 1 and 2. The first port here is the GPS. So I'm just going to go connect, connect. Just kind of set that right there. Okay, so now I've got the power set up, and then we're going to go ahead and plug it in. Now obviously if I was getting this set up for production, I'd go ahead and connect these Wi-Fi antennas to the front as well, as demonstrated in this HD2 5G. So what I'm looking at here is on the router I've got a green power light. I'm going to have a red status light. When that status light turns green, I know that it's booted up. Then I'm going to have my Wi-Fi. This Wi-Fi will turn on. This Wi-Fi usually stays off. That's our Wi-Fi WAN. So I can enable both these Wi-Fis to have 2.4 and 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi. And you can see there the status is green. You should see that it detected the cellular 1 and cellular 2, and those are going to start flashing here in just a few seconds. There's my Wi-Fi 1. Okay, my cellular 1 is flashing. Cellular 2 is flashing. And it looks like my cellular 2 is solid, which means it should come online here in just a few seconds. Okay, so now that the router is connected and powered up, we're gonna go ahead and add it to InControl. Now this router is already in InControl, but if you need to add it to InControl, you can go to Settings, Add Devices, put in the serial number, click Next, and then you'll show up on your connection here. This little exclamation mark just means that the default password hasn't been configured yet. So one of the things you can do is go to Settings, Device System Management, and I can actually have InControl manage my passwords for me. So I can enable that, assign a random password for each device. I can even set my default password to be Peplink admin, hit Save Changes. And then if you need to see what those local passwords are to log in, you can access that right there, download admin passwords. Now all the routers that are added to this InControl group are automatically going to have their passwords randomly generated and the username set to Peplink admin. That's going to allow us to kind of centralize and protect that router. Now that this router is online, the first thing you're going to want to do is check your firmware. Now this is a special build of the firmware for the 5G router, so we are not going to manipulate that at all. We're going to leave that exactly as it is. Let's talk about configuring and set this thing up. So the first thing you can do is use InControl to push Wi-Fi settings if you'd like to. So we can go to our Wi-Fi group-wide Wi-Fi settings. I can enable Wi-Fi management, hit Save Changes, add a new SSID. We'll call it Peplink U. I can choose the device availability. I can enable on all devices in this group, some devices in this group. If I do some, it's going to show me the list of tags that are assigned to the different routers, and I can choose that. Or I can say on all devices except ones with these. For this video, I'm just going to say all devices. Here I can set my security policy, so I can set up my WPA2, WPA3 personal. I can set up my password. I can enable layer 2 isolation and fast transition roaming. I can set up the SSID visibility. I can also create a VLAN tag if I want to. And so there's all these different options we can go through. Hit Save Changes. And now my Wi-Fi will get automatically pushed down to this router. Now I can go to my network settings. I have my ability to control my outbound policies for traffic shaping. If you want to, you can watch the Peplink University training on outbound policies. Firewall rules, grouped networks, access control lists, and our VLANs all can be configured here locally inside InControl. Let me give you a little tutorial of the router itself. So if I go to my MBX, I can click on the MBX, and I'll see that I'm connected to AT&T, LTE, and T-Mobile 5G. So that's kind of neat. Sitting in my office, I got this 5G connection. I have the untagged LAN. I can control my Wi-Fi with this on-off. That's going to turn off the broadcast or that Wi-Fi radios. So I can turn those on and off right there. I can see my bandwidth usage, how many clients are connected, my CPU load, and my power consumption. So if I had two power supplies connected, you would actually see DCA and then DCB, and it's going to share the power consumption of those two devices. So if I go to settings, I can then go remote web admin. That's going to let me log into this router, the router's GUI, without having any sort of interface connection. So if you look back at my setup, I have no Ethernet connections plugged in here. I'm simply just using InControl with the cellular. Now if I have a custom SIM card with a custom APN setting and you need to plug in, all you would do is plug in and then go to the IP address of the router, 192.168.50.1, and then you'd be able to log into the router, and then you would see this screen right here. So if you plugged in an Ethernet cable and went to 192.168.50.1, you'd be able to log in, and the default username is admin and the default password is admin, and then it's going to prompt you to set your own password or change your password. So now that I'm in the dashboard, I can see my WAN connection status. I can see my LAN interface, my AP, which is currently off because I pushed it to turn off via InControl, and then I can see the health statistics of this device. I can see my firmware, my uptime, my CPU load, my power consumption, temperature, power input. So there's that terminal block, and then the dual redundant DC block inputs. The priority here is the priority in which the connections are going to be active. So it's important to understand how you want your internet connections to operate. So a good sample configuration that I set up for people is I drag WAN 2 down into priority 2. Because a lot of times you say, hey, if I have a really good internet, I only want the cellular to kick in as a backup. So I tell people, look, if you have WAN 1 as your priority internet, you plug an Ethernet connection into WAN 1, and then you'd have your internet connection, and then these internet connections, WAN 2, cellular 1, 2, 3, 4, are all going to go into standby mode. In the event that you are plugging into, say an unknown or unsure internet, and it's maybe unreliable, move that into WAN 2. Then WAN 1 becomes no cable connected, WAN 2 becomes active, and then it'll bond or utilize WAN 2 and your cellular connections. This is going to give you the ability to take advantage of all of your internet connections. If you're in an office type setting and you want cellular resiliency and you have two internet connections, drag the WAN 2 back up to priority 1, and now you can have two internet connections active at the same time with the cellular connections as your backup internet connection. So you can configure the priority of the internet connections, which ones are active or not active, right here, just by dragging on these little lines, dots, and dragging up and down. So that's pretty easy there. To configure your WAN settings, like to set a static IP, we just go to Details. I can give my WAN connection a name. I can set my connection method, whether DHCP or static IP, L2TP, GRE, or PPOE. So if I had a static IP, I could just set the static IP there. I also have my routing mode, so I have NAT, and if I click this question mark, I can click here for IP forwarding and actually turn this into a router instead of a NAT. So IP forwarding basically would make sure that the LAN subnet is routed through the WAN interface, not NATed through the WAN interface. If you want to NAT remote VPN peers, you can turn this on or off depending on your preference, and that's how you would enable your routing mode. You can also set your DNS server settings. This is really important because your health check of this internet is primarily going to use DNS. So you want to make sure that you have accessible DNS servers. So check with your network operators to make sure that works. Your standby state, remain connected or disconnected. If you hit disconnected, it's going to save you bandwidth, especially on cellular connections, but it's also going to take longer to activate. So depending on the speed of your failover of standby, you want to make sure that says remain connected or disconnected. Whether or not you want it to reply to ICMP pings, you can say yes or no. If you know your bandwidth, you can put it in right there. Here's your MTU and port speed settings, as well as your ability to VLAN tag that WAN interface. Then down here's your health check settings. This is how the router knows this internet connection is good or this network connection is good if you're in IP forwarding. You need to make sure you put in something that it knows how to do. So for instance, if this is a private network with no internet, maybe set the ping to be 1 or 2 devices on the other end of that WAN circuit. If you have a DNS server and you just want to do a DNS lookup, you can do that. I personally favor the HTTP lookup, and the reason is because, like, say you have a cable internet connection and the bill isn't paid. Well, it'll actually stay connected because usually DNS still works. But they stop HTTP traffic and redirect you to their landing page. So if you put in www.google.com and www.bing.com, you'll know that this WAN will show up as failed because it's unable to access those websites. Bandwidth allowance is great for cellular or satellite connections where you need to ensure that, hey, I'll only get 20 gigabytes of data. So you can put in your billing date, the amount of data, and then you can actually set that up right there. And then if you have a public internet connection with a whole bunch of IPs, you can add your additional IPs. This also works for a CIDR block. So say if they're routing, say if your ISP is routing a block of IPs to another IP address, you put the CIDR IP up here in your static IP settings. So you'd put in your static IP, 70.168.99.10, for example. Let's say they give you a small network, .9, and then they give you a big network that you have with a whole bunch of IPs, 186.77.77.1, and maybe they give you like a /29 or /29, and you just hit boom and it fills in those IPs. So that's how you can add additional CIDR routes or additional IPs to your ISP appropriately. And then if you have dynamic DNS, you can enable that here and then just hit save and apply. When you hit save and apply, it'll show up. It'll save those settings and apply the changes. Hit cancel. So that's how you configure WAN settings. Cellular settings, if we go to details on the cellular settings, here's where we can configure and see everything. So you're going to be able to see your mobile telephone number assigned by your operator. Here's your IMEI. You need this if you're going to activate a SIM card with your carrier. Sometimes the carrier say, hey, what's the IMEI? Well, say if we wanted to add another internet connection to Cellular 4, I can go to details, and you look, all these things are blank except the IMEI. That's your hardware identifier for that specific modem. So I can give AT&T or Verizon my IMEI of this Cellular 4, and then I'll be able to have that. There is one IMEI per modem, and there are 2 SIM cards. So you can give the same IMEI to AT&T and T-Mobile or Verizon, and then plug them in here. So this one IMEI is your hardware identifier, and then you can have 2 SIM cards in the device. This disabled Wi-Fi WAN, if you turn this on, it'll actually enable that Wi-Fi WAN functionality, and then you can connect to Wi-Fi hotspots as well. This is really good if you're going up to like a Starbucks, or if you're like an RVer going to an RV location, or a boater going into a boat location, etc. SpeedFusion Cloud is really easy to set up and configure in today's world. All you have to do is just get your activation key now, and I can say activate via care plan. And then you can watch my SpeedFusion Cloud video, part of our Peplink University series, if you want to. If you go to Network tab, this is going to let you configure your LAN settings. So we have our default VLAN that's default to the Peplink router, which is 192.168.50.1. You can add new VLANs, or you can go to InControl and create a new VLAN. So if I wanted to create another VLAN for this router, I could come into here, into InControl, go to Add VLAN Network, type in voice, VLAN 2. Never use VLAN 1. That's considered native VLAN or default VLAN or management VLAN. So you never want to use VLAN 1 because VLAN 1 and VLAN 0 are basically the same thing. All balanced routers, we need to give it a default subnet, 192.168.2.1. Subnet, we can do inter-VLAN routing, which allows the voice network to talk to the data network. You could turn that off if you don't want to allow that. And then you put in our automatic DHCP servers settings right here. Enable DHCP logging, set your range, have it automatically assign DNS. And then here you can add extended options, like if you did option 66 for your phone server or something like that. Hit save. And if I go back to my router, my voice VLAN is going to show up right there. And so now my voice VLAN is set up and deployed. I can also add a VLAN manually, 192.168.3.1. VLAN 3. I'll say no DHCP on this one. Hit save. And so now I have a locally configured VLAN. So you can configure them in InControl or you configure them locally. When you make changes, exception of the internet connections, you have to apply the changes when you're done. So if I go to my dashboard and I change an internet connection, I hit save and apply, and those get applied right away. But when I'm doing other things, I have to hit save on the page. Like if I wanted to add a static route that said 10.0.0.0/24 goes to 192.168.2.10, I can add this and then I hit apply changes. Now that static route is added to my network. We have our WAN server settings, DNS proxy settings. It's a great way to interrupt or ensure DNS availability. Like we have the ability to include Google public DNS servers. We can enable DNS caching for faster DNS response. We can also add our own local DNS records. Then if you click the question mark here, we can add advanced settings for DNS resolvers. So I can assign static DNS servers for each type of network I have. And then I can also click here for settings for DNS lookup options. So I can actually put up a domain lookup policy in my DNS options as well. So the DNS settings get kind of cool. We also have our bonjour forwarding capabilities. So if you're doing bonjour forwarding and you want to make sure that the untagged LAN shares with the guest LAN for Wi-Fi printing, you can just add that right there and hit save. Once you have network op settings going, we can go to our port settings. Port settings allow us to configure how are these 9 ports that we have. And remember this down here, we have this WAN 3 that can also be a LAN port. So we have our PoE settings for the 8 ports. We have our speed options. So you have your 1 gig, 100 meg full, 100 meg half, 10 meg full, 10 meg half. We have our advertised speed, and we have our port trunk type. We have trunk and access. Access tags the VLAN leaving the port and removes the VLAN coming into the port. Trunk carries the VLAN tag information. So if I wanted to make sure my WAN 3 was on my guest network, I could say access guest. I plug a switch into this LAN 9 port, and now everything coming off of that will be part of that guest network. You can set your port type and your VLAN access right here within the settings. I can also trunk custom and then select my untagged and my guest, for example, or my voice and my untagged and remove the guest. That way the guest network has no access to this port. So you can do your trunk ports or your access ports as you see fit. You just have to remember you have to hit save and then apply when you're done with that. Captive portal, I'm going to create a whole video on captive portal, but you can configure either a local captive portal on the Peplink, or you can go to network settings and do centrally managed captive portal. I personally find the centrally managed captive portal a lot more reliable, so I'd recommend using InControl for captive portal. You simply just create a new captive portal, give it a name, give it your company name, tell people you want to access. You can do either social integration, open access, guest accounts, tokens, email authentication, or even SMS. And then you can have how the guests are required to log in, what networks are allowed or allowed clients, access control list management, using our firewall capabilities, Google Analytics tracking. You can do our landing page with failover. So here's all our landing page and redirect options. And then we can cache the splash page on the local device for faster response. So I'm in using our captive portals. If you want a captive portal to network, you want to create the captive portal, then go into your VLAN, go to your voice VLAN, go to your VLAN, and then you can assign the captive portal to the VLAN after you create it. So it's pretty easy using InControl to manage captive portals. But if you don't want to use InControl, you can create it right here. So you can create a new captive portal, give it a name, give it a host name if you want. You can upload a corresponding captive portal SSL certificate right there. You set up your access mode, open access, user authentication with like a radius server, or an external system like Kuva, Chill, or hotspot system. And then you can put in the access quota limits, the quota reset time, the allowed networks, and then logout handling, and then you can also do your splash page redirection right there. So you can program that right there. Advanced is going to give us all of our cool SD-WAN options and router options. First, you can configure your SpeedFusion options. To learn more about SpeedFusion, check our video on SpeedFusion. Once again, we have another video on SpeedFusion Cloud as well. I'll do a follow-up video talking about the differences between SpeedFusion Cloud and SpeedFusion as well. We support IPsec VPNs, we support GRE tunnels, and then for traffic shaping, you've got to make sure you set up your outbound policies. If you don't set up outbound policies, it's just going to load balance among all your internet connections based on the priority on the main dashboard. So for example, if I wanted to send all my data over my bonded SpeedFusion, I would want to create a policy that says if my destination is any, then my algorithm is priority, and then drag my SpeedFusion Cloud or my SpeedFusion VPN to the highest priority to send that traffic out. Once again, I have a video on SpeedFusion Cloud and outbound policies, but just making sure that you understand, if you're watching this video, to understand that all of the traffic shaping is done here in the outbound policies. This is probably the single most important aspect of a Peplink router outside of our SpeedFusion technology, because without this, you're not really using SpeedFusion. So make sure we know how to manage your outbound policies and whether or not you're using SpeedFusion Cloud or SpeedFusion. Just as a quick overview, SpeedFusion Cloud is Peplink's globally distributed SpeedFusion network that allows you to quickly and easily enable internet-based SpeedFusion bonding. SpeedFusion is privately hosted in a private cloud or any public cloud environments, and allows you to have your own infrastructure that takes advantage of this SpeedFusion bonding. So you'll have layer 3 access between your sites. You can do inbound port forwarding, inbound NAT mapping, things like that around your SpeedFusion network. So SpeedFusion allows for traffic management on your LAN side. SpeedFusion Cloud is just bonded internet. Port forwarding. So here you can create port forwarding rules from your WAN connections into your LAN. So it's pretty simple. You basically give it a name, tell it what protocol you want to port forward. You can do either single port, port range, port map, or range mapping. And then you can select the WAN connections that you'd like to map, select the interface or IP addresses that you wanted to set up, and then you set up your server IP address. You can port forward over SpeedFusion. So if you had this router 192.168.50.1 and you had another router 192.168.51.1, you could actually send this, if you used SpeedFusion, to 192.168.51.10 or whatever appliance was sitting on the other side of that VPN. And it'll take the public IPs that you have on your WAN over here, send it over our SpeedFusion VPN to the LAN of the Peplink device, the remote Peplink device. So port forwarding is very powerful. NAT mapping is basically the ability to just map all the ports of a single IP. So you can take all of your public IP ports and send it to a particular device. And then you can also do outbound NAT mapping to set a specific LAN address to a specific public IP. QoS, we have 3 user groups right now. I believe we're trying to add more, but right now there's 3. So you can add an IP address or a subnet to one of 3 groups: a manager, a staff, or a guest. So you can, once you assign those groups, then you can do bandwidth control. You can either do group bandwidth reservation, which allows you to specify a certain amount of bandwidth to each group, or you could do a boot group bandwidth limit where you set the maximum of each individual within a group. So managers are unlimited, then staff, you do like a 10 megabits by 5 megabits, and guests get a 3 megabit by 1 megabit type thing, and hit save. We also have application QoS capabilities. So you can add any of our applications. We have a bunch of applications supported or programmed in here, from voice over IP to gaming, etc. You can add those and then give them a priority. You can also do cable and DSL optimization. I don't really recommend that in today's world. That was really good a couple years ago, but if you're running like slower or poor cable, it's a neat way to optimize for the variableness of cable. And then we have our PEP VPN traffic optimization. This is going to optimize or prioritize SpeedFusion or SpeedFusion Cloud or PEP VPN traffic over internet traffic, just ensuring the reliable VPN traffic to ensure that that gets priority over, like, say, Netflix. When you go to your firewall, we have our access rules. We have a kind of a unique or kind of a neat setup, I would say, for our firewall policies. You have outbound policies. This is anything from a LAN to a WAN. Inbound is anything from a WAN to a LAN. Internal is LAN to LAN or LAN to VPN. So coming in, going from one LAN to another VLAN or going over SpeedFusion, all that's going to be your internal firewall policies. We have our IDS and DOS prevention, and then we have service firewall rules. This is for specific to applications inside the router. So your SpeedFusion handshake, your SpeedFusion data port, your web admin access, DNS server, and SNMP server. You can actually have their own firewall policies as local service firewall rules. Our content blocking is growing all the time. So you have application blocking. We have a whole bunch of layer 7 applications you can block right there. We have our web blocking categories. This is a free feature as long as you're using InControl. You basically can say automatically update your database and then select the categories you want to block, and then hit save, and you can hit apply changes, and then that database is used. You can also customize block domains or exempt domains from web blocking, so to override the database. And then you can exempt groups. So if you say, I don't want my managers to succumb to the blocking, you can exempt the groups, the managers group, and then the staff and the guests would follow the policies. Or you can exempt subnets. Once again, you just hit save and apply changes to apply that. Routing protocols, we support OSPF and RIPv2 as well as BGP. So if you're trying to do PEP VPN route isolation, you can enable it there. You can also advertise what networks are allowed to advertise over the VPN. So for example, I can say only advertise my untagged network and my voice network, but don't advertise my guest network because I don't really care if that subnet gets advertised over my infrastructure. You can also advertise static routes if you want to, and then you can set up your zones for PEP VPN. By default, as soon as you set up a PEP VPN or SpeedFusion VPN tunnel, you're going to see 0.0.0.0, and then interface is going to be PEP VPN. BGP, we support iBGP and BGP, and so you can configure all of your BGP settings right here. I'm actually using that right now as my internet for our office. So we have two 1 gig fiber lines coming in, then we have our own, we have 2/24s of our own subnets, and then we advertise that over BGP. So it's kind of fun and very nice and easy to use. Remote user access. VPNs, especially work from home, this is a hot commodity right now. And so remote user access, if you enable this, we support L2TP VPN with IPsec, PPTP, which I do not recommend, and then we also support OpenVPN. OpenVPN is probably the most popular right now just because of the ability just to download the client and push out multiple profiles. So you select your profile type, choose which interfaces you want to allow to receive the connection, and then you can go down to connect to the network, and you can choose a VLAN for those. So you can actually create a VPN VLAN and have that show up there. Then the authentication, you can either do local accounts on the router, you can connect to an LDAP server, a Radius server, or an Active Directory server. This does not support Active Directory 2016 or 2019, but it does support Active Directory 2012 and below. I believe we're working on fixing the 2016 and 2019 and updated firmware. So you hit save and apply changes. And once you do that, I can go to the status page and you'll see my OpenVPN client profile, and I can hit route all traffic or split tunnel. I can download these profiles, load them into my OpenVPN client, and now I can VPN into this router. A couple miscellaneous settings. Almost all of our routers support high availability. This is the ability to configure two routers with VRRP in an active passive. So in other words, you're going to share the WAN IP address, but you'll have 3 LAN IP addresses. So in this case, you see my LAN IP address is 192.168.1. If I set this up, I could put a virtual IP address of .254. This 254 is the default gateway. The .1 is the management or sync IP address of the device. My slave would get 192.168.50.2, for example, in this scenario. The group number is going to identify the MAC address kind of clone. So make sure you don't have 2 1s or 2 2s or whatever. If you're using Peplink, always make sure that if you're doing a whole bunch of routers throughout your infrastructure, choose a different group number. So that way it kind of generates different IP addresses. Radius server is kind of an up and coming feature with part of our 802.1x profiles and things like that. You can assign your multiple radius servers right here for authentication and accounting. Certificate server allows you to upload certificates for SpeedFusion IPsec VPN, your web admin SSL, your captive portal SSL, and your OpenVPN certificate authority. So you can also add Wi-Fi WAN client certificates and Wi-Fi CA certificates. Service forwarding allows you to redirect traffic. So like SMTP forwarding, for example, you can enable this to send it to so each WAN has its own SMTP server. A lot of times the ISPs will give you a mail relay to prevent blacklisting. So you could put in like mail relay for ISP1, mail relay for ISP2, and mail relay for ISP3. Web proxy forwarding allows you to make sure you forward to different web proxy forwarding settings or options within those ISPs. DNS forwarding, this is a great way if you want to forward outgoing DNS requests to the local DNS proxy. And that's what I was talking about earlier in the network settings, where we had all those local DNS options. So this allows you to force DNS to the Peplink. So someone can't change the DNS and override like an open DNS or an umbrella DNS type service. And then here, custom, you can set up your own custom forwarding as well. Service pass-through allows you to kind of override the stateful features or pass through different, manipulating data. So your SIP, a lot of times you can do compatibility mode. That's going to allow you to do SIP versus ALG. So if you turn SIP in compatibility mode, that's going to turn ALG off. So this would be Cisco, this would be non-Cisco. H323 pass-through, FTP pass-through capabilities, TFTP pass-through capabilities, and IPsec NAT. And you can configure different options right there. GPS forwarding is any router that has cellular and GPS. You can enable GPS forwarding. And here are the options for that. So you have a NEMA and TIAP, and then you have the different options for the NEMA sentence type, as well as the TIAP. You can do PV or CP, as well as set up a TAP ID or a vehicle ID for the NEMA. GPIO, this is related to the ignition sense. So you see your ignition IP, and then you have these extra OP. The IP is just an enable digital input and input send or ignition sensing, and then you can set up your delay. So that's basically you plug into the IP ports and then set up your delay, and then your ignition sense detect when the ignition gets cut off, and then keep the router running for that many of seconds until it shuts off to save your battery. Peplink now has a network time protocol server built into our routers. It's a great way to keep time synchronized. It's just an on or off, and then the IP address of the Peplink becomes the time protocol server. Grouped networks allows you to group IP addresses. So you can create a group of IP addresses. This can be used for firewall policies, outbound policies, for overall security and just management of IP addresses. Remote SIM management is an up and coming feature with our SIM injector. So you'll see the SIM injector right here. So this is a SIM injector. That will be a topic for another conversation later, but that's the remote SIM host. And then our SIM toolkit allows you to run against features of your SIM cards. So I have my cellular one, I can see my IMSI, and then I can do SMS testing, or I can do USSD testing. Put a USSD code and plug that in there. SMS, it'll load up, and show me SMS data if it was there. We talked about the AP within InControl. If you want to configure your SSID or SSIE options, you can do it right here in the AP controller. You just need to make sure you turn the AP on. And then you have your system settings. That's going to give you your admin security options, your firmware management, your time, your scheduling. Scheduling is really nice. It allows you to have, you can set up schedules and then have different actions like turning the radios on and off or loading configuration protocols based on a schedule. Email notification. I recommend using InControl, but you can just use email notification, put an SNMP server, and then have different event log notifications sent via email. Your event log, you can send events to a server. You can also push events to your mobile device via the app. You can do URL logging and session logging built all right in here. So this is great if you have an SIEM and you want to take advantage of URL logging, session logging, and event management on a centralized SIEM. Based on this as well, we also have NetFlow capabilities. If you go to your URL and change index.cgi to support.cgi, you can bring up the kind of a back-end Peplink management. Gives you some pretty cool options. Down at the very, very bottom, you have NetFlow, so we can configure to turn that on. Click Enable, and then you can put in the server and the port, and then you can choose your NetFlow v5, v9, or IPFix, and then save that to send NetFlow information to your SIEM as well. SNMP monitoring is pretty standard. We support v1, v2c, v3, SNMP trap. We have a community name and your v3 usernames. InControl allows you to control how the router handles InControl. So you can do either an InControl controller, enable or disable, restrict to status reporting only. So this if you only want the router status reported to InControl, but you don't want InControl to push any changes. And then you can also specify a privately held InControl. So if you have your own private InControl servers, you could add them right there. If you want to download a backup of your configuration profile, you can come here and click download, but also you can go to your router and InControl, click show all, and scroll down to configuration backups. And you click download. Every time you click apply changes, it's going to save a copy of your configuration profile right there. So you have all your configuration profiles saved in InControl right there. And then you can upload a configuration file and apply it. Here you can add feature add-ons, like if you wanted to manually put in a license code for SpeedFusion Cloud. You can reboot the router right here. And then you have tools like ping, Traceroute, wake on LAN, and WAN Analysis. So you can do a ping test if you want to over a cellular connection, LAN, or even PepVPN if it's configured. You could Traceroute, and these are great diagnostic tools, especially with a multi-WAN router, to make sure DNS resolution is working properly as well as the traffic flow is working the way you want it to work. WAN Analysis allows you to act as basically an iPerf client or server and then run direct WAN-to-WAN connectivity tests. And then in the status, we have our device status, which gives you ability to download your OpenVPN profiles, download a copy of the configuration, the content filtering, download your diagnostic report, enable remote assistance, and then you can come into Ethernet ports and see kind of a GUI of your Ethernet port status, which is phenomenal for troubleshooting if someone's got something plugged into the right port. Then you can go to active sessions, and you can see all of the sessions that are happening live on your router. You just hit refresh and hit search, and then you can filter and view your active sessions. Very powerful troubleshooting and making sure that your outbound policies are working, because you can see if the traffic that you're trying to send over a particular connection is in fact routing over that connection. Client list gives you a list of all the clients on the network and lets you see what's happening and how much bandwidth they're using, what their SSID is. You can also go to InControl and then go to clients right there and see all of your clients in InControl as well. And then OSPF and RIPv2 is going to give you the status of your OSPF health. BGP is going to give you your status of your BGP health. The event log is going to give you all of your event log information that is currently being logged, as well as your firewall event logs that are being logged. WAN quality is a phenomenal troubleshooting tool for being able to see the quality of your internet connections. So you basically pull up the WAN quality report, choose a WAN port, and then you can see what's going on with it. So if I pull up Cellular 1, I can see my latency and my quality of my cellular connections over time. And I can pull up Cellular 2, which is my T-Mobile 5G, and I can see what's happening with that as well. And then usage reports gives you real-time information or hourly, daily, and monthly information on bandwidth. So I can pull up real-time bandwidth reports, or I can pull up hourly, daily, and monthly historical reports. So I can go hourly, and it'll show me hourly bandwidth consumed over time. So real-time is the only thing that's going to give you real-time bandwidth, like how many megabits per second are being used right now. But that is the MBX series router with a kind of deep dive into the GUI. Is a lot of information, so we're going to publish this to our Peplink University and hopefully learn something. Have a great day.